Hi everyone. Thank you for having me here. Can everyone hear me? Yes. So yeah, I was here 2 years ago and I was talking about my project at the time, which was basically coded visuals for electronic music performance, like coded in processing. This time I will be talking about my current project, which has happened since then. I started my PhD research project, and it's actually not a digital project as such, but rather it locates and positions certain set of creative practices and asks the question, is there a new role for these types of practices in the context of, this is a bit of a mouthful, yeah, of our interactions, very kind of intense interactions with commercial online media platforms. And what I got specifically interested in is this idea of attention economy. So, and attention economy and the way it might affect our perception and our attention processes, and that actually just is kind of like an avalanche, because then there's all these other questions. What is attention? What is human attention? Is there different types of attention? And are there any specific types of attention that are being affected by eye-to-screen interactions? Our culture and sort of, we are naturally really sort of ocular-based. There's this idea of ocular centrism. But at the moment, all these questions, this is an ongoing project, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the theoretical underpinnings and key concepts, and some of these key concepts might actually still change. They're like a little bit up in the air. And I will talk about what I've been doing sort of this academic year, which was the second year of my PhD project. So, which was more like practice-based part that followed the literature review. So, yeah, attention economy. I have two very heavy, text-heavy slides. So, apologies, but they're not all like that. So, it's kind of interesting to think of this attention economy. The term was apparently coined like in the 1970s by Herbert A. Simon, a political scientist who considered new factors in economic theories, such as information overload. And this idea of attention scarcity and information overload is not new. It's not connected to the sort of online platforms. It was considered in the context of the older types of media, radio, television, even posters, like that actual physical posters that we see, and other types of media that we kind of consume. But online media platforms introduced this like new scale and new aspects to this idea of attention scarcity by following the attention economy model, where attention becomes commodified and it becomes a product, because they are profiting from prolonged attention of the users of their products. So we're not paying for these often highly sophisticated products, but yes, we're paying with their priority is our engagement, how long sort of we stay on these platforms and engage with them. So, An important consideration in this context is whether the internet promotes certain types of attention which can have detrimental effects on physical and mental capacities of their users. And yeah, a lot has been already written about this, and I have looked at kind of several texts, so there's all these other aspects to it. Obviously, there's data collection, and there's all sorts of other potentially negative and positive aspects, but I'm like, just for the purpose of this project, I'm focusing on this idea of how a human attention is affected, and actually what does it even mean. So yeah, they are, yeah, so like some of the writers are Jenny Odell, there are these other business ethics writers who wrote about how addictive these platforms are, and how the way they harm the users is demeaning, exploitative. But there's also, like, some of my kind of ideas for it are based mostly on what Yves Citon wrote about attention economy, and he wrote about this particular types of attention, and among them is this idea of creative attention. And creative attention, he sort of argues that is the one that is being negatively affected. So my project is kind of asking the question, is it possible to somehow mitigate these negative effects? And what can sort of, and my starting point was a museum space, and this is also because of things that I wrote before I started the PhD. There's an article that was published in Museum International that I wrote because I got kind of interested in this concept of embodied cognition. And during the COVID pandemic, because I've been working, I should add, I've been working as a gallery and museum educator for like over 10 years. And during COVID, I was asked to create online content for the sites like the National Museum of Ireland sites, the Butler Gallery, the Hugh Lane Gallery. And so I sort of produced these stop motion kind of workshop videos, talks and other things, but then I started kind of asking myself who is watching these things, and actually, there's a huge difference between watching this and actually going to a museum, but actually what are the ingredients of that difference? So embodied cognition theories in a way answered a lot of these questions and really resonated with my own experience in that context. So I'm kind of, my idea is this idea of the site of attention care. And at the moment I'm kind of working, I'm writing like, I've already written like one version of a definition of it in this context. And I started with the museum, but then I decided museum is this huge, massive thing, and the museum is not only exhibitions, it's collecting, it's preserving, and I'm actually not really interested in those areas for this project, so I decided to drop the word museum. And also the word museum was really taken over. Like, people were asking, what is your PhD about? I was like, it's about this and this, and once I said museum, they were like, oh yeah, it's about museums. I was like, oh, yeah. So at the moment, I'm calling it exhibition-related practices, because what I'm thinking of is these outreach and education practices, but maybe some elements of exhibition design, and looking at the space and kind of like space as this kind of aspects of the space that are sort of like, I think maybe there's sort of like they affect us on many levels. So I started with the workshops because this was kind of what I had most experience with, And this is what I have been doing this year. And my idea was like the starting point was a drawing workshop, but expanded drawing workshop. And say if we think of people like John Ruskin argued that to draw is to really see something. And like in my experience, I think this is a true statement. But with this project, I'm asking a question, what about if we respond with drawing, with mark making to a non-visual input? What about like drawing to sound and drawing to other sensory input? Can we activate certain types of attention that are maybe harmed by this hyperocular centrism and eye-to-screen interactions, these kind of modes of attention economy? But you know, they might be doing other things kind of simultaneously. But I'm kind of focusing on this idea of creative attention, but also what I find interesting is there are just these different concepts of attention, like the idea of background attention and the explicit, implicit attention as well. So what I am doing at the moment, I'm designing and facilitating, leading, expanded drawing workshops, and I try to kind of construct them. My idea is that there are these multimodal sequences where one sort of modality gets translated into another. Yes, and I kind of investigate whether they can be play a role in attention care, attention maintenance. And these ideas are also, there's kind of several sort of ideas within it, and one of them is that, you know, maintenance and care are these, Kathleen Lynch writes about care in the context of capitalism, and this idea of care as this labor, these actions that are often unnoticed and they're unspectacular, as opposed to these grand ideas of growth or even degrowth concepts. So these can be small gestures. They you know, they're not necessarily like big things. If somebody will go to a workshop and leave, you know, a different person. These are kind of these small shifts in, I think, perceptual habits. This is kind of what I'm looking for and what I'm looking at. Also, there's several more things, but from my own experience, I've also noticed, and from talking to other people who worked in outreach and education roles, I would argue that they are kind of increasingly gendered and undervalued as creative endeavors. So I also reclaim them as research and artistic practice. So yeah, as I mentioned, this kind of like previous writing, this project, I find it just sort of pulls together a lot of my ongoing long-term interests. I have a background in architecture. I studied architecture for a while and I quit and I went to NCAD and I did craft design. So I'm a trained maker. I'm a trained glassblower. And then my first master's degree was critical theory. It's a MA called ACW, Art in the Contemporary World. And then during the pandemic, I found myself I did an online, well, it turned out to be an online master's course in TU Dublin in user experience and user interaction design. So I just find that this project just sort of brings a lot of these things together. I decided recently that I might like start mentioning it more. I'm also a trained shadow puppeteer, so this is also kind of one of my sort of skills. So I like working with this sort of media, like light and shadow. I'm just going to talk a little bit now about what I've sort of been doing, and as I said, this is like an ongoing thing. So this took a while. Well, this was my first kind of event as an event. It happened in IMA in January this year, and I called it Silent Disco Sketching Club, and it was also a radio show on Dublin Digital Radio. I pre-recorded it and I tested it first with a group of peers. I got feedback. My idea is this is basically like an iterative series of events, and they're all one-offs. So I collect feedback. It's voluntary feedback, anonymous feedback at these events, and I use the feedback to sort of design, and I also take into account the space that is the event is happening in. I'm kind of calling them workshops or drawing events. So with this one actually involves participants. I asked Dublin Digital Radio to broadcast it at 11 on Saturday, and I just had this event at 11 on Saturday in IMA for 1 hour, which was the duration of the radio show. And I asked everyone to bring headphones, and we just sat there. And my pre-recorded radio show was basically tracks. They were all composed and performed by people I know. I asked their permission and I named them. But it also included some prompts for drawing, which I said you can kind of follow them or not. This is just to kind of give you maybe some ideas of how to approach this piece that I think maybe will sort of match maybe in some way the sound. And then I kind of, in a way, expanded it. I did another one in March in Uni 44, which is an independent gig space. It's run by Kirkus Ensemble, and they have a series of improv sessions, which are kind of monthly, more or less, and they're led by musicians. So everybody comes in and basically just improvise. There's some instruments, you can bring instruments. And I led one of these as a drawing session, listening and drawing, but I think I kind of like packed too much into it because I decided to expand my multimodal sequence and add smell to it as a sort of like a voluntary thing. So there was just more, like there's always things, workshops, and I find I'm more and more actually fascinated by this idea of creating this, and I'm not sure what it is, creating this situation, this space during the workshop, because if I'm doing it the way I'm doing it now, I'm not inviting my friends. I never know who's going to show up. And, or even the individuals, and the individual persons who show up, you just kind of don't know how they might start interacting with each other. These workshops are for adults, but apart from that, they're just open for everyone to book. They're free. And to this one, like there was also this thing, some of the people who came were musicians, like trained musicians, and some of them were not. And I also kind of included in the description, if you can't play an instrument, bring something on your phone and we'll play it through the speakers. So you don't have to be a musician to join. But I found this was actually a little bit of a challenge with all the instruments and people playing and keeping the time, with the improvisations. As these were my jars with different substances to smell. They had numbers on them, and you could kind of pick and smell a couple of them if anybody wanted to respond to the smell with the improvised sound, which 3 or 4 people did. And I also had prompts on these pieces of paper, and the participants were invited to write their own prompts and they were like upside down, you couldn't see the prompt. So you could also pick a prompt, but it was kind of like I started a little bit of a gamification of this So the prompts were for people who were responding with drawing, but the smells were for the performers. And then it kind of got, I think it was just too many rules for like 1 hour workshop, to be honest, but it was a good experiment. That was just kind of the setup. So everybody sat in a circle, drawing boards for everyone. And yeah, this is the feedback that I ask for feedback, kind of like immediate feedback, because I think it's kind of nice to even get, and I always say to everyone, even like if you write 3 words of like what worked, what maybe didn't work, or if you have any suggestions or anything, or you don't have to write anything, you know, but if you have any thoughts that you would like to share, it's great. But actually, sometimes people choose to come up to me and share their thoughts, and I was really surprised at this one. Okay, I have 3 minutes left. And somebody kind of said to me, who was a musician, that they realized while they were playing that the fact that people were drawing, listening and drawing, changed the way she played, because she was aware that people are responding with drawing to the sound. She says just some of the outcomes. And I might mention, I've been sort of taking part in different research programs as well, and I went twice, last September and in April, as this Scandinavian organized the olfactory cultural studies seminars. So one was in Norway, this was the second one in Copenhagen, and we did these olfacto walks. It was great, very, very interdisciplinary, with like anthropologists and all sorts of crowd. I've never had any friends, or like I never knew any anthropologists before, so it was just kind of a new experience, and really, really great event. So just to sort of expand on my understanding of just like how you can approach smell, because it's such a tricky one to work with, to be honest. So the second one, myself and 2 other researchers, we were all asked to design an olfacto walk, which we did, and we asked people to respond. We asked everyone to just walk around the room and smell the room, to respond with drawing, and then gave it a title. It was all like 10 minutes, basically, with the whole thing. So very, very short, so you had to be, so these were some of the responses. This was the workshop I did with the students, where I actually had 3 hours for this, so the students, our fine arts students in TU Dublin, second years, so we kind of had time for discussions, and I sort of decided to maybe talk a little bit about sensory boundaries, and how I think these workshops also can, I'm realizing certain things as I kind of go along. These workshops also result in making visible certain responses, maybe, you know, like subjective responses, and maybe like less recognized subjectivities, and including neurodiverse responses. So we all were talking about our preferences for certain textures or sound, and our experience of spaces depending on the sound or smell. Were some of the drawings. I did the slow art day in IMA, where I also included smell and touch. And this was my most recent one, Drawn to Sound. That was the National Drawing Day in May. So I did the first part in IMA and the second part in the afternoon Temple Bar Gallery and Studios. And in IMA, we listened to the gardens, the environment sound. And in Temple Bar Gallery and Studio, there was a video shown downstairs at the time. And I just asked for the audio from that video. And we went upstairs and we just listened to the soundtrack. And we sort of were drawing to it. And then I kind of said, well, you know, we will draw to the soundtrack, and then maybe you can watch the video afterwards and see whether that changed your perception of, you know, the soundtrack and the whole video. So that's me. That's just, and this image is like a kind of, said that it's like a rare image of myself at one of my workshops, and it was taken by Quelyn McNamara from culture file, Lyric FM. So last week they broadcast, so if they, I did kind of like a short piece that it's still online on RTE Lyric FM, and it's called Drawing as Resistance. If you'd like to listen, it's 8 minutes long if you Google Drawing as Resistance. And this was about this particular workshop. Thank you.